Your show will go live in 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1.
Broadcasting live. It's America's longest running talk show on computers. It's Computer America, bringing you the biggest names in technology with guest interviews, new products, and your emails. Listen live at computeramerica.com on any device around the world. Email the show at live@computeramerica.com or find us on social media. Be sure to check out our website for contests, giveaways, show notes, live video stream, podcasts, and more. You're listening to Computer America.
Hello and welcome into the Computer America Show. Thank you so much for joining us and welcome into another edition of the program as we get things kicked off here with, now it's a little bit disjointed and a little bit out of his normal time slot, but that's okay. He's completely allowed to do that and we're happy to have him on this month as we have on Dariush Derakhshani. He is our visual effects expert and our computer graphics expert here on Computer America. And yeah, we are going to be talking about a number of things, including some of the news coming out of E3, the Electronics Entertainment Expo. That's right. Because, you know, the hardware, the graphics of it all, it's really easy to be swayed by, you know, saying 4K and, you know, HDR and blah, blah, blah. And it sounds cool, sounds fresh, sounds unique, but what does it really mean? Well, that's what Dariush is here to help us with. So we're going to be talking about that and more, but a few things I should mention, including computeramerica.com. That will have the show notes to any articles, videos, anything, of course, our guest website, anything that has to do with today's show, you can find over at computeramerica.com. Also, while you're there, be sure to check out the video portion of the show, where you can not only listen to Computer America, but you can watch Computer America. Always a lot of fun. And then the last thing is social media contest. If you haven't entered, why not? Very simple, very easy to do. There's like 13 different ways to enter. And hey, we could be calling your name to award you a Logitech M720 triathlon mouse. That's what it is. Control 3 different devices, all with a single mouse. Very cool. Check it out. And yeah, I think that's just about everything. So yeah, we're just going to jump right into this and, you know, see how much of the news we can get in, because there's a lot to talk about and we're going to try to keep it to a technical minimum. But let's face it, this is the part of the show that everywhere else we can kind of say, oh, you know, it's for these people, for this. Like, it might get a little technical as you talk about these high-end processors. So at any rate, we'll keep it as simple as possible. And to help us do that, once again, Dariush Derakhshani. And yeah, Dariush, welcome on to the Computer America Show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Once again, happy to have you here. And like I mentioned, there's a lot going on. Actually, kind of fortuitous that that you were able to make it on the show a little bit early, because we are like a week or two, or maybe 2 or 3 weeks out from Intel Surprise i9 processors that they kind of pushed out to the market, or at least, you know, announced to the market. And then we are also on the heels of Threadripper, which is AMD's new line of processors. Obviously, I want to start there, but yeah, you know, just a quick overview. I mean, what and actually, a quick overview. Why do i9s and Threadrippers matter? Why do high core processors matter? And what does this mean for the market in general? That, you know, hey, we have a new, we have, for the consumer space, we have a new high end.
Yeah, I think that's a really great question. Who's it for? Who'd want to do this? The professional space typically ends up being in the Xeon market and server-based motherboards and CPUs and stuff. So why so many cores? And I think the answer comes down to people like us, you know, home-based professionals in a lot of ways. I typically, like, my system's an i7 system, and I do a lot of work from home, 3D graphics and so forth. So having the option of having a lot of cores is really beneficial, because that's what I do. I push a lot of cores, especially when you're rendering and when you're putting things out. So it's really helpful for that. I do a lot of online videos and a lot of editing, so having memory and a powerful processor is important. So i9 ends up being, at least the idea of i9 ends up being a really compelling concept to go for because I've got a Skylake CPU. It's about 2 years old now at this point, going up to the KB Lake i7 coming up whenever that's going to be the 8700K. It's
Right.
not going to give me that much more of a boost. It's going to be about the same, maybe 10% faster overall, but cramming more cores on there if I'm able to, if I get a good i9 and we'll talk about some of the rumors a little bit later, but let's say it's all good and it's all available.
Mm-hmm.
Having those extra cores is definitely very helpful for the kind of work I do. But as far as the typical casual consumer, I don't think they're really going to get much of a benefit for the cost. Um, Gamers as well, I think um, probably a good i7 is their sweet spot. The i9 may be more of a look how many cores I have sort of flash. I
Right.
don't know how much it'll do in helping the game run. So I would still suggest put your money towards a good graphics card or two.
Right. And just real quick, we have a
Mhm.
story that we're probably going to touch on a little bit later, but there's a reason I threw in the story about Destiny 2. I don't know how much of a gamer you really are. Obviously, you have the hardware for it, but the passion, I don't know if that's there for you, Darius. But I kind of bring up Destiny 2 because uh, they said that the PC version of it, which is coming 2 months later, which I hate,
Mhm.
but the PC version of it will be able to utilize all the cores. Like no matter how many cores, they're saying it's unlocked, and if you have an 18 core processor, then it will be able to utilize all 18 of them. So I believe it's kind of one of the first games. Obviously, there are like you mentioned, video rendering and
Mhm.
things like
Right.
that. But for video games, this is kind of new territory and exciting as well.
Yeah, yeah. Ultimately, it comes down to what they're going to do with the extra cores that they're going to use. Are they going to throw them into the graphics processing and basically have a hybrid of GPU and CPU working to push the pixels? So it really comes down to how they're going to use those cores and how it's going to push the game any further. And if it's just some more market speak,
Mm-hmm.
or if it literally is going to be pushing, because
That's true.
graphics are where the game lives or dies. And if you're able to patch in the CPU and the GPU for your anti-aliasing, for your textures, for the processing of the lighting and HDR environment, all of those things, if those two pieces of silicon can work together, awesome. That's fantastic. I don't, I'm not an expert on coding at all, and I am looking forward to Destiny 2 as well. It's one of the few games I get to play on my Xbox.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I'm looking forward to it and seeing what it looks like, but I think it remains to be seen. Anytime a first generation thing comes out, I'm always skeptical because there's a healthy amount of marketing speak. And again, I think this touches on kind of nicely what we were discussing a little bit before the show is, that rumor mill and how much of these things are in response to a pure marketing decision by one of their competitors and what's actually true. So I'm a
Right.
2.0 kind of guy.
Well, yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, 2.0,
Yeah.
you get all the bugs and the kinks worked out. I mean, it's a very safe
Yep.
place to be. So I do
Right.
not blame you one bit. But getting back to the i9s and the Threadripper, actually that does ties back to what we were talking about before because the Core i9, if it seems maybe a little foreign to you, we of course talked about it a bit on the show, but for the longest time, it's always been i3, i5, i7, and all of a sudden we have i9. Like it was really thrown at us without much not forethought, but it was kind of random because it was outside of
Yeah.
Intel's usual announcement cycle. They announced, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it's like KB Lake X. Like this is a new type of naming scheme that they have for their thing. It's like it's KB Lake and Ivory, whatever it is, and Ivy Bridge and whatever. Like they've never added the X demarcation to their lineup. So I mean,
Y-
how odd is this? And also, because obviously you have dealt with the Xeon processors before. How much of the i9 is really just a a lower end Xeon processor that they're trying to aim towards consumers?
It's a good question. Again, I know they've done the moniker Extreme, having the Extreme CPUs that end up having a few more cores. I know they did that with the Broadwell chips. I think they did Skylake E or Broadwell E, um, where they just have more cores. Because I know when I was looking at my Skylake CPU a couple of years ago. I was really thinking about the extreme version of the previous generation, the Broadwell,
Mm-hmm.
and that offered a couple more cores, but at a lower clock rate. And I ended up going with the Skylake, obviously. So I think they're just changing around their market speak a bit and trying to brand their processors to create a middle path between the enthusiasts who don't want to jump to Xeon, because once you jump to Xeon, you're also talking about error correcting memory.
Mm-hmm.
Your clock speeds may be slightly different, but it's a more stable chip, and stability is more important professionally than is just pure raw speed. So I think i9 is something they would have done anyway, but I don't know if they would have called it i9. They may have still stuck with the whole X thing or the extreme thing. But I think the i9 is a clearer branding, and I actually welcome it because it was a little bit confusing when I was looking at, well, what's Broadwell E, what's X,
Right.
so I think i9 will make it a little bit more clear where you want to go, and to people that do a lot of multi-threaded work, that's where it's going to really come in. And Destiny 2, as you mentioned, seems like it's going to be sort of out of the gate as hopefully breaking the barrier and saying,
Yeah.
yes, I'm going to use all your cores. In which case, if the industry follows suit, I would say within a year or two, a lot of titles will be hitting all of the GPU and all of the CPU. And in that case, then yeah, all bets are off, and i9s would be very valuable for gamers.
Right. We discussed this, I believe, either last month or the month before, where the idea of quad core processors, the idea that you only have 4 cores, 8 threads, is pretty industry standard, and game developers and really a lot of program developers, not just games, but just general programs on your computer,
Hmm.
only really utilize 2 to 4 cores at a
Right.
maximum. And I guess if Destiny does take off and you do get a good response rate for the unlocked, the idea that you can have 16 cores or 18 cores or 10 cores or even just 8 cores, if they
Right.
can start making those, then yeah, I mean there really is no reason to stick to 2 to 4. The only reason they haven't expanded was, I think that they thought that the general consumer only had 2 to 4 cores, and there was no
Right.
demand for a lot more core processing power.
Right, right, exactly. And even some of the professional applications I use, like Autodesk Maya, a lot of the functions that I run within it only end up hitting 25 to 30% of all my cores. They only end up hitting 2 cores,
Hmm?
one or two cores, one or two thread, I'm sorry, 2 or 4 threads. Um, in certain cases, yeah, the whole CPU gets utilized, but I would say I get the whole CPU being used maybe 35 to 40% of the time when I'm working. So, you really have to tailor the software towards that. And that's much easier said than done,
Right.
I would imagine. Yeah. So I would love to see Destiny to open the floodgates,
For sure.
and because, there's no harm in it. If you have 25 cores or if you have 2 cores, your game should be able to play at the best that your hardware has to offer. And I think that should just be universally standard. So it's a little too complicated right now. You
it's
know what I mean?
just yeah, it's just really that thing where it probably does take time. I should really get someone who develops video games, but it does take time. It does take man hours. It does take
Yeah.
a lot of specialization, to make sure that it can run on the many cores. But if they can just optimize it for, like you said, any amount, then you're going to please a lot more people, and I think the whole industry is going to be a lot better off. It's just no demand. Why waste the money in doing that? But hey, Intel and obviously AMD are starting to expand the market because,
Right.
again, we were talking about the i9 and how rushed it felt, and it's a not so poorly kept secret that it was really in a response to, and again, if you're watching the video portion, we have the article up there. This actually came out today, but AMD Ryzen has something called the Threadripper. So I'll leave this to you, Dariush. But I mean, what have you heard about the Threadripper? And I mean, do you think that the i9 was kind of a knee-jerk reaction, or at least something that's like, oh crap, we have to compete in the same market because Threadripper is 18 core.
Yeah, yeah, it's pretty sweet. It comes down again to marketing, and calling these things different things to get people excited and get the hype going on. But essentially, they're all the same thing. It's just there's more cores on that CPU than the step below it. So with the Ryzen, I think AMD sort of rewoke the sleeping beast that may be Intel. I think it sort of reignited those CPU wars that were so hot and heavy several years ago that
Mhm.
just sort of kind of went to sleep the last few years. There was no doubt about it in my mind when I built my workstation, when I built my last 2 workstations, that they were going to be Intel based. And that covers the last 5 years, basically. There was no question that I was not going to use an AMD processor because I was going to get more power for my applications out of the Intel chips.
Right.
So with Ryzen, there was a new shot across Intel's bow. Now, these things take so long to develop. These plans have to be vetted and gone through for so much amount of time, I'm sure, in the manufacturing process that the i9 was undoubtedly going to come out at some point.
Hmm.
I think the naming, the marketing, and the announcement were probably done to kind of capitalize on, oh well, Ryzen's uh, putting out a higher core CPU, so let's show our hand a little earlier than perhaps they would have.
You
So
think maybe
in that
they
case,
you think maybe they would have done it closer to the holiday season, and like, hey gamers, check out this new thing you should buy this holiday season, but they kind of jumped it because
I think so. I think so. And this is pure conjecture on my part, but yeah,
right.
I think it would have come out a little bit later. And again, with so many games not able to use all of the cores that you've got on your die, it's a tough market to focus on because you don't have games like Destiny 2 yet that are prevailing in the market. Your biggest asset, your 2 biggest assets in your system as a gamer are your video card and your storage speed. Those 2 things are going to do the most for your gaming system, bar none. If you have a great CPU but a really poor video card, you're going to have a poor experience with your game. Kind of the same thing could be said for cameras, like nice high-end SLR cameras. It's not so much the body of the camera, it's more the lens that you put on it. And
Hmm.
high quality lenses will get you great photography no matter what the body is. It's the same thing going on here, although I'm hoping that with Destiny 2 and hopefully other titles that'll follow, that it's going to disrupt that market and it will become a lot more simple to choose your machine because now the CPU is going to do more toward your game than before.
Right. Yeah. It's obviously when you have that much more to play with. This is strictly a kind of a headache right now for PC gamers. In a little bit, we're going to talk about the new Xbox One X and the PlayStation 4 Pro and what that means for console gamers. But for PC gamers, I really with the i9, you have another category of processors to worry about with the Threadripper and AMD back in the mix. You have another thing to consider. I mean, being a PC gamer, it has not been easy lately, and more so nowadays. So, but I did kind of want to get your feel because when I looked at processors for the for the i7 and even all the way up to the 7700K, which I purchased, I mean, for these processors, the price was, I felt, actually pretty darn good. $300 here and $250 there. I mean, low hundreds. When you look at the price point for the i9s, and the i9s, I can't imagine the AMD Threadripper being too much less expensive, because I think AMD is going to come out at a lower price point than Intel. I
think so too.
Yeah, that's kind of their thing. But the Intel Core i9s, these things are expensive for just 2 extra cores or 8 extra cores, all the way up to their Core i9 7980XE, which is under $2,000 for a processor.
Yeah.
Is that more in line with Xeons, or like?
Yeah.
Does this sound normal to you?
This is server based. This is workstation based. That's the market that's going to lavish their attention towards this hardware, not the gaming market. It's just not there yet. The software isn't there yet to really take advantage of the cores that you're putting into it. So unless you're a professional in many ways, unless you're multitasking a lot of different things, I don't think having all these cores is really going to do much for you. Like, it's very compelling for me because it is going to boost my bottom line. But if you're a guy sitting or a gal sitting in the in your office, your bedroom, your living room, playing games on your PC, you're not going to get that much of a performance boost visibly in your games from upping your core count. If you have at least a Skylake at this point, I don't think it's compelling enough to throw everything away and go with the Threadripper or the i9 just yet. I think the market has at least a year to kind of see where things fall with the higher core count. As soon as you have a lot more titles that promise, like Destiny 2, to really utilize the entire CPU to make your gaming experience better, great. But unless you're running 5-6 different apps at the same time, and you're doing all sorts of other things and rendering and video processing, all that kind of stuff, I just don't quite see it there yet.
Really what you just said was, if you are looking for a new processor, great news, because last generation is 10% less powerful, but just got 20% cheaper. I mean,
Exactly.
right. You don't need the latest of the latest. These are certainly powerful, but the cost and the performance increase are, really what you've come to expect from Intel over the past couple of years, and that's marginal or, incremental improvements. It's, really for me, I'm totally happy with my 7700K. I'll probably wait until either first or second generation of the new 10 nanometer chip, but I don't even know when that thing's gonna come. It's been forever.
No idea. Yeah. No idea. No idea. Yeah, exactly. I think we just have to kind of sit and wait. I mean, these processors, these new ones, are definitely going to appeal to the people who just want to be on the cutting edge and have the the biggest, fastest machine in their group of friends.
Right.
Definitely, for sure. But I think for the average and even the above average users, I don't think it's going to work out
Right.
until the software really fills in.
Yeah, and again, we keep mentioning Destiny 2, and simply for the fact that it is the first game that, and Dariush may be right, may just be marketing speech, but I'm personally totally buying into it. it's the first one that will be uncapped frame rate. It will be, be able to take all cores, and really, it looks like no matter what your hardware is capable of, it will adjust itself to to kind of use it, which is again kind of the dream of PC gamers, because PC configurations can vary so wildly from person to person. But the last thing I wanted to bring up though about AMD and Intel with the Threadripper, actually in particular, the story just from today, we had some leaked specs, and hey, if there's anything more reputable than news, it's maybe sort of leak news. So we have some some specifications and performance benchmarks from the AMD Ryzen Threadripper, and this is the 16 core 32 thread. Obviously Intel has one that's 18 cores, so I can only assume AMD has one similar. But for the 16 core 32 thread, we have things like 3.4 gigahertz base frequency, which is pretty darn good. I mean,
for that many cores, for sure.
Yeah, it's very good, and they have some other speeds. Just kind of poking through here, but yeah, we have the link to the article in our show notes if you want to check it out. But the benchmarks, kind of on a core to core basis, are better than the Xeon processors. But when it all comes together, when you start doing the hyperthreading and you start doing multi-core processes, Xeon wins out in the end. So I mean,
right.
What do you kind of get from that?
Yeah, and if you notice that the Xeon clock speed is set to 2.6 in that comparison, where the Threadripper is 3.4. So the Xeon is taking a more careful, more workstation fail-safe sort of approach to it, pushing that. Imagine if the Xeon was at 3.4, it would crush the Threadripper, especially multi-core performance. So again, this is they're sort of inventing a little bit of a new tier in the user market by going with the Threadripper, by going with the i9. They're making that little platform in between the enthusiast, hobbyist, and the professional, and appealing to the more budget conscious professionals as well with these. But studios that are working on crazy movies and feature animations and all that kind of stuff, they're going to go with what is stable.
Right.
And if it means the clock speed's a little bit lower, great. But these Xeons are manufactured. They're really tested for content development and other workstation capabilities. So that's where they kill it, is that multi-core performance. And you can see there's a significant difference in the table comparison on that website that you've linked to when you hit the multi-core performance. Now imagine if Intel spends a little bit of time stably with stability in mind, pushes up the core speed for the Xeon, and they get closer to 3 gigahertz on that Xeon. It's going to be no contest.
Right.
Professionals are going to go with that Xeon,
right,
and not.
Oh, sorry. The only thing I want to mention was that it's kind of the same approach that AMD has with NVIDIA when it comes to the graphics cards. Is that on the high end, money is no object. NVIDIA is going to be the best for whatever, but for the price, for what you're getting, for what have you, AMD puts up a really convincing argument to buy their stuff. So I think price is obviously going to have to play a pretty big role in the success of Threadripper, but AMD has so much built up goodwill. I mean, or either that or Intel has cashed in all of theirs, because people are losing their minds over, hey, AMD is back, everyone, hooray,
Yeah, and that's great. My very first system that I built, I think I was in high school, was a 286 system on an AMD chip. I've always been a fan of AMDs, and it's really nice to see them striking out in the CPU again and starting to really create a lot of waves in there. So I think ultimately, and we've discussed it a couple of shows ago, where this is really great for the consumer because it's going to force the hardware to get better and faster, and the prices to start coming down and becoming
Exactly.
gentler and softer.
Exactly. So I think right there is a perfect place to leave it just for a minute. We'll be back right after these messages, and we're back with Dariush Derakhshani right after this.
We are all Brother Wolf. 10 years ago, a group of locals banded together to create positive change. We took animals into our homes, held adoption events at local retailers, and talked to the community about our mission to help build a no-kill Asheville. A decade later, we have achieved so many victories for animals in need. There's been so much progress, yet there's still so much to do. As part of our year-long celebration, we encourage you to become a member of our special Compassionate Circle program. With a monthly donation of $10 or more, you will have behind-the-scenes access to the work we are doing at Brother Wolf. Our goal is to reach 1,000 members because we receive no government funding. Working together, we can help build and sustain no-kill communities. Learn more at compassionatecircle.bwar.org. We are a 501c3 tax-deductible organization.
And welcome back to the Computer America Show. It is 31 minutes past the hour as we continue on here with Dariush Derakhshani. And one last point I wanted to make about the AMD and Intel, and just like Dariush was saying, this is at the end of the day, this is going to be great for consumers because competition breeds innovation, and the whole one-upsmanship is just better for everyone. So very, very cool. But one last point I wanted to make, which was AMD, they've surprisingly they've been in a lot of consoles. You'd think they'd be not swimming in dough like Intel is, but they've at the same time, they have cash, and it kind of confuses me why this would happen, as to this might be the first where AMD and the Threadripper processors, according to this article that from WCCF Tech, and the AMD processors are going to be exclusive to a manufacturer, in that you can only get a Threadripper processor if you buy them in Alienware computers, Alienware pre-built computers. So, I've never heard of anything like that before. I mean, Dariush, do you think this is kind of a, I don't know, obviously if you pay for exclusivity, there's a lot of money going into that. And I think AMD saw a chunk of change and they went, yeah, that's going to help things a bit. Why would they do this in your mind? And, how do you feel about exclusivity in processors?
Well, let's go back to Apple versus IBM, Apple versus PC. And Apple stayed exclusive with their hardware, and the PC platform was open to clones. And look how that turned out. The majority of the market share belongs to generic cloned PCs and not quote unquote IBM. You know what I mean? So
Mm-hmm.
I think in a way, if this exclusivity is I think this exclusivity is a marketing strategy. I think it's a way to soft roll out this new hardware to see how it's being absorbed. And I would hope, or I would think, that it's going to become more generally available to system builders in the future. I don't think it's going to be exclusive forever, or
Until
there's
the
going to
end of
be
2017. I'm sorry, just real quick. Until the end of 2017, and then it becomes available for anyone. But for 2017, Threadripper's in Alienware.
And you know what? There you go. And there's not a whole lot of time left in 2017, so it's not that terribly exclusive. It's just sort of for the people who really want to get it right now. And I don't know if that's such a great idea. It may be born of they don't have that many. They don't have the manufacturing capability to put out that many. So this might be a good way to limit the supply that goes out there. Or it may literally be, hey, we just wanted to strike this deal with Alienware and see how it goes. But it's 6 months at this point, and then it's going to be available to other system builders. So that I don't know what that's going to buy them, honestly.
Yeah, it's. I mean, obviously, again, I think AMD saw the opportunity to make a lot of money right off the bat. You know, whether or not this was successful or not, and they said, sure, why not? But at the same time, I really feel like, yeah, as you know, Alienware, as cool as their cases are, I don't know many people who buy their own processors. You know, buy standalone processors who think, you know, that well of Alienware, because ever since they were sold to Dell, the prices have gone up and blah blah blah. Like, I think the cross section of people who want Threadripper and people who will buy from Alienware, I think that, you know, that Venn diagram is pretty slim. So
Yeah, I
yeah,
agree with you.
so, you know, if nothing else, consider Threadripper delayed to the first quarter of 2018. That's I think that's as far as we're gonna take that. So, you know, just kind of overview. Obviously, I think you said it pretty well with i9 and Threadripper. In the end, this is going to be good for consumers, right?
Absolutely, without a doubt. The competition is going to help pricing. It's going to help innovation. And it's nice to see AMD really starting to get under Intel's skin again.
Definitely, definitely. So, all right, and yeah, I think that's where we're going to leave that one. And we covered, of course, the Destiny 2 and how it will, you know, obviously take advantage of all of this if you happen to get your hands on it. But yeah, you also have some topics that you want to cover, including the new Xbox One and the PlayStation 4 Pro. Kind of compare and contrast them because, yeah, if you have not been paying attention to E3 or Computer America, the Xbox One X was announced, and you know, Darius, I'll let you kind of go over some of the specs, but I'll say I have an Xbox One, and I'm so on the fence. I don't know if I am mad at Microsoft for making me feel behind, or
Mm.
I'm kind of comfortable because I'm like, well, you know, it's still not, you know, it's not making my Xbox One obsolete. It's just making it feel old, you know?
Right. You have the regular one or the 1S?
I have the one, just the, you know, came out first
Yeah.
edition, that one.
Yeah, me as well. And I've been looking at the 1S kind of every time I'm in Best Buy walking around like, huh, 4K gaming, that sounds pretty cool. I've got a 4K TV. And that's really what's going to push me eventually when the price comes down for the 1X to get the 1X is the ability to run these games at 4K. I think that'll look super awesome because my son and I will stand in the middle of the living room as opposed to sitting back on the couch, and we'll be playing, just a few feet or several feet away from the screen. So that's when you're really going to notice 4K doing a fantastic job over regular HD res. So that is what's going to compel me to get it eventually, is the 1X. And when you look at its specs, it's going to come in at about $500, which is a cool $100 more than the PlayStation 4 Pro. Now, I'm gonna put all the games aside and not get into the microcosm of who's got what game, but purely on hardware speak alone, the Xbox One X takes the PS4 Pro to the woodshed out back and spanks it. It is hardware wise, it's what you kind of want to have in your PC. And it's sort of bringing a really good high-end PC to your living room because it's got 12 gigs of RAM. It's 50% more RAM than the PlayStation 4, which is at 8 gigs. And memory is super important when you're running high-res textures, when you're running a lot of geometry in your scene. You really want fast memory that covers all of that.
Hmm?
But where the 1X really takes off is in its graphics. And it's kind of funny because AMD is in both sides of this fence. They're both in the Microsoft and in the Sony boxes. But what they have in the Xbox One X is rated at what was it, 6 teraflops.
Yep,
Yep.
yep.
which is basically the base calculation for how many processes that you can run. That's literally how big is your engine, how fast can your car go. Where the PlayStation and what is
4 4.2. Yep.
4.2, yeah, 4.2 exactly. So this is also another almost 50% increase in your graphics capabilities. Now, when you're looking at 4K, it's not just it's not double the size of HD. HD is
No, it's four
1920.
times, right?
It's four times exactly. So you're exponentially creating more work for your computer the higher resolution that you go up. It's always a power of two. So having a lot of memory, having a lot of bandwidth to run 4K natively and correctly is where the 1X is literally it's gonna take PS4's lunch.
It, it's
Uh,
it's and just real quick, I mean, it's one of those things that 4K gaming has been on the horizon ever since 4K televisions really hit the
right,
mainstream.
right,
The idea that consoles can pull it off, it's you kept talking about marketing speak when we were talking about the processors, and I think the marketing speak for 4K gaming has been overdone to the nth degree in that
right.
yeah, the PlayStation 4 Pro and the Xbox One S, they could technically do 4K gaming, but they sacrifice frame rates. They've
Right,
frames per second.
right.
I'm hoping that this finally does it because up until this point, it's been pretty disappointing when it comes to 4K 60 frames per second.
No, absolutely. I'm totally with you. And the 1X is promising 60 hertz refresh, which is pretty significant. And most TVs that are worth their weight are going to be 60 hertz at 4K. And this is where the HDMI 2 set comes in. Um, 30 hertz is fine and is what most TVs used to be. You're sitting on your couch, you're watching it. It's not that big of a deal. The refresh rate doesn't need to be that fast. But for gaming and for being up close to 4K screen, like I've got a 4K HP monitor that I'm looking at right now, it has to be at 60. Anything less than that, and you're going to start getting eye fatigue. If I had to stare at 30 hertz this close, 16 inches away from my screen all day, my head would literally explode. So I think 60 is the minimum when you're talking about the refresh rate, and that is what good 4K TVs will be able to do. So check your specs if you're looking for a new TV. Make sure, of course, 4K HDR, it's going to be plastered all over the specs on most of these TVs, but you want to make sure that you can hit 4K at 60 hertz if you're serious about 4K gaming.
Right, and that kind of takes us back to the Destiny 2 article I mentioned a little bit earlier. Is that is going to be it's going to be available in 4K. It's going to be like we said, take advantage of all the CPU, but it's also promised to be available in 144 hertz refresh rate. So it's gaming is at that console gaming and PC gaming are at two different kind of intervals where console is really striving for that 4K 60 frames per second. They're really striving for that. And for PC,
Right.
the new it factor, not really 4K is what I'm finding. I mean, 4K is great and all, but
Hmm.
something along the lines of 1440p, which is 21 by 9 aspect ratio. Think movie theater. I mean, for
Right.
some reason, that's really up and coming, but also 144 frames per second. I don't know why, but those are the two standards that are trying to muscle their way in.
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with distance. When you're at your computer, you're a foot and a half away from your screen. And that's when you really will notice not just the resolution, but also you have to think about dot pitch, how close the pixels are together. How big is your screen? How big is your resolution has a lot to do with that. But then the refresh rate, how many times per second that it refreshes the screen is really, really stupid important. The closer you are to your screen, the more you're going to notice that. And that's why frame rates and refresh cycles for monitors are so much more advanced than they are for TVs. And I've been looking around. I have a 27-inch HP. It's 4K. I love it, but every now and then some of the text could be just a little bit too small because I'm old and failing. So I've been thinking about getting a 40-inch TV to replace it, but that's been the sticking point is the refresh rates aren't quite there yet. I could get a nice 60 hertz refresh 4K screen for probably about $600 for a TV, which is a really good deal actually. But that's been the big hang up is the eye strain. Is there going to be ghosting, things like that? You don't run into those when you're on a console because typically you're a few feet away from your TV when you're playing.
Right, absolutely. So back to the Xbox One and back to the PlayStation 4 Pro. I mean, hardware-wise, this is. Oh, and for everyone out there, this is indeed the long-rumored Project Scorpio that Microsoft
Yeah.
was hinting at, and the marketing people said, you know what, we're going to ruin your Scorpio name, and we're going to give it the Xbox One X because, like the name sucks. There's no other way to put it. The only way that it kind of makes sense is that maybe if like the anagram of it, Xbox One X, kind of spells out Xbox, like that's the only way it kind of makes sense. But naming aside, what do you think about the $100 price increase? Because when I first heard about it at E3, you look at the hardware and you say you can see exactly where that $100
Yeah.
went, right?
Absolutely, without a doubt, without a doubt. But this is we're a different type of person than the average. I'm going to go buy this for my kid, or I'm going to go buy this for myself for Christmas,
True.
because we're much more aware, and which let's just call it for what it is. We're nerds, we're geeks, and we're proud of it. But I think the $100 is going to be a little bit of a factor in people deciding if they're going to put their money down on Black Friday this coming Thanksgiving and buy this thing for Christmas or not. Uh, I'm not. I'm not. I'm going to wait it out until next year because I think certainly by the holidays this is going to be down to 400.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see it staying at 500 for very long. It just can't. And console gaming has an interesting sort of a business model, sort of like shavers, or I should say razors for
Right.
shaving. You get the handle and a cartridge or two for pretty cheap, but then you pay through the nose for refill cartridges or blades. That's sort of what gaming does. Games are, out the box, 50, $60 on day one. They'll come down to 40, 30, some cases even 20.
You'd hope that, but I mean, there are AAA games that are still. I mean, I was
That's
just
yeah,
there's years after their release, they're still $60. I mean, expensive.
absolutely. Absolutely. And that's where they recoup a lot of their money is through the licensing and the sales of games, not so much the hardware. So the $100, absolutely, I can see where it went. They definitely put the money in there. And I think there's going to be a little bit of teething pains as they sort of gain traction and get out there. But I think it would have been a lot more palpable if it was at the 400 or at least a 450 range.
Well,
Because at
right.
$500, that's kind of a barrier for a lot of people.
Right, but one thing that the rumor mill, when they try to jump out ahead of things and they try to guess and they gobble up every little thing. The rumor mill before this had pegged the price of the Xbox One X
Yep.
at about
Yep.
$700 to $800. I mean, it was
Yes, they
above
did.
that.
Yeah, yeah. I've read quite a few articles on that were talking about it. They were saying, at what point would it turn people away? And from what I've read, about $600 was the okay. You're gonna get a fair amount of people like us to go in and pay for it. As soon as you hit 650 and above, and it's like there's just no way it's gonna work. So, but I've read reports that were 7, 8,
Yeah.
even up to $1,000 bucks. But again, that's just guessing. That's just conjecture.
So, and just getting into the nitty gritty of it because we just finished talking about $2,000 processors. when you look at the hardware specs and compare that to PC, it's certainly a little bit underwhelming because the speeds and the memory speeds and things like that are definitely on the lower end of a gaming PC. But hey, $500,
For sure.
it's pretty darn good for a console. But if you could speak a little bit, because I mentioned this in an article in our write up, but when the difference between console gaming and PC gaming is that when you design a game for the PC, you have tens of millions of combination of hardware, whereas when you design something for a console, you have, maybe 6 configurations to optimize for. Like,
Absolutely.
even though the speeds are slower, do you think the optimization is really going to make, console gaming, it's still going to make those games run very, very well?
I think so. I think so. And it goes back to the analogy I brought up before, Apple versus PC, because there's so many different clones, but so many different configurations. People are not going to have as smooth of an experience as they would with an Apple, because that Macintosh is so tightly controlled. Same thing with the consoles. If I get a game, I throw it in my console, I expect it to work. And if it doesn't, I'm gonna toss the living room. I'm gonna get so mad, right? But if I download a game, I throw it on my PC, I'm going to be a little bit more forgiving because I'm dealing with a machine that I built myself. I'm dealing with all sorts of different hardware and drivers, and I'm also dealing with Windows 10. Let's call Windows 10 out for some of the deficiencies that it has.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a little bit more of a hit or miss. But when I throw that thing in my Xbox, it's going to work. I'm going to expect it to work. And back to the price point just for a second, you look at the fact that this Xbox One X has a 12 gig, 6 teraflop AMD graphics card. If you were to go out and you were to buy yourself a 12 gigabyte graphics card, you're going to be at least in the $300 range, at least, right?
Right.
So you're kind of picking up a really nice graphics card, and for the other $150 or so, you're getting a whole system built around it as well. So in the end, $500 is kind of a steal for the technology that you're getting with the One X, but still, people really expect a 3 to 400 dollar range when they're going out to buy stuff, for Christmas and so on. And one future thing to think about, VR. How's VR going to fit into this?
I was hoping that Microsoft would say something along the lines, because at the PlayStation, I'm sorry, yeah, at the PlayStation event, of course, they have PlayStation VR. They released like 4 or 5 games. Obviously, they're still supporting it. They're still actively developing for it. VR had at least a presence at PlayStation. Microsoft didn't say anything, and like, this thing is more capable than the PlayStation, and they still didn't mention it. Shocked.
Yeah, yeah, I'm okay with that because I think it's going to come sooner than later. I don't think VR is in a place for the mass consumer market quite yet. There's a lot of great stuff with the Oculus and the Gear,
HTC
uh,
Vive, right?
the Vive, exactly. But there's still sort of enthusiast, hobbyist sort of market and professionals. The Xbox One X has the specifications that will run VR better, and especially with that 12 gig video processing, it's needed for real-time VR. It really is. When you look at the PlayStation 4 Pro, that also will run VR. No, no doubt about it. But I think there's a lot more headroom with the One X, and I think the next 2 years are going to be a lot more telling about how VR will come into your living room, because the console is where it's going to sell VR the most.
Mm-hmm.
That's when it is going to become a consumer electronic and not a PC gadget where nerds like us will geek out over. That is, to me, the crystallizing moment is when it becomes mainstream, and when you go get Halo Wars 3 in the future, there's going to be a console and a VR version that you get on your disc.
Right. Yeah. You had to say Halo. That was another disappointment for Microsoft. No Halo 6, but hey,
Yeah.
you take the good with the bad. But no, you're right. VR. But like I said, it had a presence with PlayStation. PlayStation isn't dropping it like 3D or something like that. Like it's still limping along. It has not been embraced wholly, but I think VR is still going to come. It's just a matter of when and who's going to bring it. And you're right. It's probably going to be consoles. Obviously not the Switch, because the Switch is wow, the Switch is its own thing. But
Switch is its own thing. Yeah, absolutely.
But and one last thing I kind of want to mention about the Xbox One X, if you were still on the fence, I just went to go look up Blu-ray players, 4K HDR compatible Blu-ray players. They're still in the $300 to $400 range. So for $100 more, you get an Xbox.
Absolutely right. And that is a big selling point for this thing, is that 4K HDR player. Now, HDR TVs, I don't know if they're that terribly prevalent, but
They're
that's
out
going to
there.
get
They're out
you.
there though.
They're out there, right? I don't know who has them. I think my TV has it. I'm not sure which flavor of HDR it has, if it'll work, but I got my TV about 2.5 years ago, so just when HDR was coming out. But that is going to make the biggest difference, 4K or not, because that is going to give you much more color accuracy and color depth, and that's what's going to make the screen look nicer. So HDR Blu-rays are going to look
Yeah.
amazing and fantastic. If they're mastered right, they're going to look amazing on an HDR TV. So that's a big selling point, and I think that's what's going to push a lot of people to going with that $500 range. But I think still the mass market really needs this to be around
Right. I, I,
430.
I mean, that's kind of what pushed the PlayStation 3 into a lot of people's homes, was that the
Absolutely,
Xbox 360 was a DVD player, but the PlayStation was a Blu-ray player. I mean, it
as a
was.
Blu-ray.
Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah,
It certainly
yeah.
happens. And by the way, just did a quick search for for 4K HDR televisions, and really, anything under 700 isn't going to get you there. So between
Right.
$700 to $1,500, not as cheap as 4K televisions, but like you said, definitely worth it if you can drop the money. But okay, so closing thoughts on the Xbox One X. I mean, do you think it's a good play? Like, I feel like this is a good place to end this current generation of consoles. Like, the next console that they should release should be, it doesn't seem like we spent too long on the Xbox One generation
Right.
or the
Yeah.
PlayStation 4 generation because of all these little incremental things. But this is a pretty good way to cap off this generation of consoles.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think the next generation of console will be built-in VR. I think they'll have a game-changing momentum to them, and I don't think it's going to be for at least another couple of years. I mean, the Xbox 360 was what, 6, 7 years in the making
It's
before the
closer to
one came out.
9. Yeah, it's closer to 9.
Yeah,
I mean, the whole thing
right.
lasted like 9 years. It was crazy.
Yeah, and the one has been out how many years now? So
Like 4,
I
I
think
think. Yeah.
there's a couple of more years to go with the one, and I think the One X is a really good way. Just like you said, I love how you said it. It's a good way to cap off this generation.
Definitely. So, all right, and Darius, this hour flew on by. I want to thank you so much for coming on. And if and as always, I'll let you plug your stuff. But what are you up? What are you up to? What are you doing?
I'm working actually with a lot of
90
educational things right
seconds.
now. I'm putting out a video series on V-Ray. I've been working on it for quite some time through Pluralsight. So I'm hoping that's going to be out towards the middle to the late summer. And my book series, I'm trying to get that back off because nobody's printing books anymore. So I'm looking at different ways to distribute that once I get my
self publish
rights
on
back.
Amazon. Yeah, self publish on Amazon. It's a thing.
Exactly, absolutely. And also some companies have
60
approached me
seconds.
about going on their video platforms with the book too. I'm waiting for my publisher to give me my rights back, and that's gonna kick off as well, hopefully at the end of the summer.
Very cool. So I think with that, everyone, Darius, one last time, thank you so much. You'll be back on the show next month, I believe. Assuming all goes right. Yep, sometimes towards the middle of the month. But Dariush, thank you so much.
Thank you. Always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure. So, and everyone else out there, thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for listening to us speak ad nauseum about processors and gaming consoles, but I think it was a lot of fun to talk about. And everyone, be sure to tune in tomorrow as we have on the program, let me get this right, Sandy Berger. There you have it, another Computer America correspondent, consumer electronics expert, and
10
catch you
seconds.
tomorrow. Everyone, have a great day. Bye-bye.